Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. On behalf of myself, Eric Hansen, and all of us here at OTT.X, we're so happy you're joining us today. Whether you're watching live or on demand, it is a privilege to share with you the experience, insights, and wisdom from the people that are shaping the OTT and CTV industry. The rapid growth of fast delivery has contributed to an increasingly crowded landscape, making it difficult for fast channels to stand out and for viewers to easily get to the content they want to watch. The future state of fast is going to bring more advanced search and discovery functionality, but that's going to make it crucial for providers to pair fast content with accurate, enriched, and standardized metadata, imagery, and IDs to streamline channel distribution and drive audience tuning. In our session today, Grace Note's FAST program lead, Adam Tenorio, and 4320's founder and CEO, Kirby Grimes, will help us understand why metadata is the key to fast channel success in this dynamic and competitive landscape. Welcome, Kirby and Alex.
Hello, hello.
Adam.
Thank you, Eric.
Hello, hello.
Oh, sorry. All right. All right. Thank you, Eric. So I am Kirby Grimes. I'm founder of 4320, and soon we're putting out a website. The Streaming Wars is going to be all sorts of news, insights, and analysis about the streaming TV space. So excited for today's webinar. Going to get a little dirty today, and what I mean by that is obviously we all know on this webinar what FAST is. We know about the enticing projections, growth figures. Talking a lot about it, and in fact, it's probably everyone's at least dozen FAST chat they've attended this year. And all these growth projections is what I like to talk about, called shiny objects. The numbers, the trends, the hype, the hype, the hype, the hype. But essentially, what we're fixated on there is the end product. And just as an entrepreneur, I like to think that, I do believe that the term entrepreneur is over glorified. And like fact sucks a lot of times, but I think more should be talked about that. And so, you know what else is a shiny object is a diamond. And when people ooh and ah over diamonds, it's the end product they're admiring. They're not thinking about the effort that was required to mine a little piece of carbon out of a volcano and polish and shape the product and all the challenges in doing so. And similarly, there's a lot of ooh and ahhing and fast. And so what we're going to talk about is less of the ooh and ah and get down to the rough edges around fast, inherent challenges that we're facing and going to touch on. And if we're going to realize all this growth that we're ooh and ahhing about, we got to solve some of these challenges. And so that's what we're here to do. And a little fun fact with me on this webinar is so 4320 is a marketing company, but we started as a UX company with a recommendations engine. So we have evolved. I mean, Samsung used to be a small trader of grocers. Now it's an electronics giant. It's kind of the way it goes. But like, I bring that up because you can't really do effective personalization and content recommendations. It's only as good as the data that we give these systems. So let's go to the agenda here. And quite simple. I mean, one, we're going to talk about the fast industry, kind of the oohs and ahs and where we're looking to go. And then the main thing we want to discuss is why metadata should be the most important thing you're looking at outside of distribution. And it's kind of the how we should get there as an industry. And so we'll do Q&A at the end. If you do have a question, just hit that little button at the bottom of the screen, Q&A, and we'll answer those at the end or try our best to. All right, Adam, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's hear from you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
No problem. Thanks so much, Kirby. I'm really excited to get sort of into the nitty gritty of metadata, but fast. Like you're saying, there are all these projections. I think we've all been talking about it as an industry for so long. But just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Adam Tenorio, and I run Grace Note's global FAST program, which was launched last year at IBC in 2023. And just to say a little bit about Grace Note, we are the world's leading metadata aggregators, connecting content across music and video and sports with the audiences who love it. So we'll get into the metadata bits quite deep in just a minute. But I think now what we're going to talk about is sort of, let's recap those shiny objects we were talking about, right? What is the promise of fast? What are the industry trends? Where do we sort of sit at this point? So if we just go to the next one. Yeah. So where are we sitting with fast? What is it that it's really promising? I think we're at the point now where fast has been, we're at what I would call its adolescence, right? It's been around for a little while. We've seen this super, super rapid channel growth. Even from last year, we've seen an additional like 300 channels. Now, I will caveat that with every time I'm looking at the industry trades, it seems like somebody's got a different number. So by our accounts, we're looking at least 300 more just within the context of the US. But in a recent Nielsen survey, we also saw that there's actually more and more familiarity with the fast space. And again, a caveat here, you're never going to hear the consumer, and you'll hear me talk a lot about the consumer today, but the layman consumer isn't saying, oh, I'm going to watch a fast channel tonight. For them, it's just another channel that's appearing on their EPG grid. But people are tuning in. We're getting the audiences. We're having eyeballs on this content. And then, of course, with the shiniest promise that we have, 17 billion 2029 increase in ad spends. I think that's the whole point of this, right? That we can take our back catalog if I'm a content provider and then put it to work and get that ad spend. Cool.
Yeah,
So
well,
I think
before actually, sorry to interrupt you, Adam. I kind of do this around different conversations in person and whatnot, but kind of putting you on the spot here is like if you think of fast, like what's to you personally, like what excites you most about fast?
what excites me most about fast, honestly, is seeing linear come back into the fray as center stage, right? Because I think we've had so many expressions of content. We have more content. We'll talk a little bit about how much content there is, but there's so much content out there that as a consumer, I can say what I'm really excited about is to have that lean back experience and to be able to access sort of the programming I've wanted in a way that removes a little bit of that choice fatigue. So really looking at this as the consumer.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, we have almost everything available to us. There's still no growing pains fast channel. So if somebody can work on that, please do. But probably from my standpoint, it's the content discovery of linear, of being able to sample content and not having to choose on it. Just because when you're only able to click on something via the way the box art looks, and I know there's a lot of cool stuff with that. But essentially, like if I look at a VOD kind of menu, it's a digital blockbuster. You're kind of clicking on the same things you would go and rent a movie in person to do. And linear kind of just samples you to something like it. You're already immersed in it. You didn't choose to click on it, and it exposes you to something you might otherwise miss. And I think that's huge. We talk about content discovery a lot. And I think linear and serendipity is the coolest thing for me personally. I just always like to get everybody's opinion on fast since we're all hyping it. What is everyone's personal take on what it means to them?
Absolutely.
I guess another question for you. Let's say I launch a streaming service exclusively all on-demand content, but it's free. Is that a fast service? In your opinion?
Great question. Is that a fast service? I think fast service is really tied to linear in the way that it's expressed and the way that we sort of expect that. Coming sort of from a content rights background, that's a big question, right? Like, is this fast? How do we sort of delineate that? What's the box and the guardrail we're going to put around this? For now, I would say that fast is a linear experience and is tied to that sort of linear watching experience more than anything else.
I mean, I have a lot of mixed feelings on that question, but I mean, coming from a content rights person, that's kind of the person you want to hear it from. All right, we can. Yeah, let me tee this one off. I mean, I'm sure when I close out this webinar and look and kind of the news thing I have set up is I'm sure there's going to be a new report on an issue affecting the streaming TV space. And if this was in person, I'd probably just randomly call on somebody and say, what are the two biggest issues in the streaming TV space right now? I feel pretty confident that they would reply content discovery or churn. At least I'd hope they'd say that to support what I was doing there. But anyway, like looking at those challenges, and I'll also add engagement. And I guess let me call out that churn isn't necessarily subscription. Like obviously we talk about subscriber churn a lot and business models that are based on subscriptions kind of matters, but also engagement and churn is just an equally as important issue for fast services as well. If you're not watching Tubi, if you're watching Tubi for 6 minutes and not an hour, that's a problem for Tubi or Pluto TV and so forth. So if I look at those two biggest challenges, content discovery and churn, Adam, you mentioned something in passing, and it was something like fast I don't want to see, it was something to the effect of, I don't want to see FAST have the same challenges that SVOD had. Do
Yeah,
you remember that? Can
absolutely.
you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I think we're going to tee that up here because this isn't really new. It's another expression. How did we get to this point where fast has become and this lean back experience is so important to me as a consumer and to me as a viewer and so on? What you touched on this actually with engagement, right? So the ability to turn your television on and to just be engaged with the content, instantly met with it, is super refreshing because, like you're talking about in an SVOD or really in a video on demand environment, I'm going through it. I'm having to make the choices. The curatorial decisions lie heavily on the user. And we've learned about this sort of overwhelming choice that we have in the industry. Like you said, everyone has access to almost everything nowadays. There's more content rights being sold in more territories. So we should really think about what happened to us, not 5 years ago as a consumer, where we kind of got overwhelmed. Even today, Nielsen also in one of the Nielsen's The Gauge, they were talking about how 20% of viewers don't even know what they want to watch before logging into a service. And then at the end of it, they could spend up to 10 minutes and just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do something else with my time. Maybe that's social media. Maybe that's something else. So it's really, with FAST, a new opportunity for us to learn from maybe our mistakes or maybe what we could have done better and capitalize on those growth opportunities through content discovery and through, maybe rethinking the EPG a little bit. Like, how do we engage with that? Cool.
You have, I mean, on EPG, I mean, let me ask you kind of the kind of question here. And you mentioned too many channels. Is there too many channels? Is there gonna are channels gonna grow? Channels gonna decrease? Channels I don't know. What are your thoughts on the EPG? Let me kind of leave it with you. I'm kind of picking up two pieces you had, and I don't want to steer your thought. I'm kind of colliding two things into where I want to go, but I want to hear it from you. Like, are there too many fast channels? And what are your thoughts on EPG? Like, beyond kind of what we see the look and feel today?
Yeah, so I think, are there too many fast channels? Let's break that question down really, because we're coming back to these pillars, right? Viewer frustration, discovery challenges, choice overwhelm, which we lightly touched on. I think we also need to think about the regions, right? Like, the US is a totally different ballpark than the international spaces. Europe is even more fragmented because we can't talk about Europe as one market, right? It's really localized and so on. Are there too many fast channels? I think there are a lot of fast channels, and that we're seeing that maybe platforms are being a little bit more curatorial in their decisions and how we present it and how we sort of do that. Content providers are also becoming more curatorial in the way that they launch fast channels or maybe prolong the lifetimes of the content that's on there. And the EPG, just to bring it back to this, we're rebuilding this. We're sort of figuring it out all over again, saying, hey, how do I make sure that a linear experience, which most of us were used to like 10 years ago, right? We were used to going onto television, you turn it on, you zap through your EPG, you try to find something you like. Maybe if there was an ad break, you move to something else. We're now in a new world where consumers have a new expectation. There's a new threshold of how do I watch, what do I expect to see on a grid or when I'm looking for content, in terms of the data that's presented to them, in terms of the imagery, the information, and then also how that's going to get, synced between maybe video on demand. I still have video on demand habits, right? Maybe I came in a little bit too late into the episode and I want to go watch the full thing, or I want to watch the full series. So it'll really be about bridging those expectations we've created with years of VOD being the key focus as the consumer into the linear EPG and sort of, making them work together. So that's sort of my point of view on the EPG. It's a format that's been around for a very long time for a very good reason. There are high expectations now from consumers on what they want to see in terms of aesthetics and data and information and how they want to navigate across that space.
Yeah, you're probably too young to remember. At one point, you kind of had to wait for all the listings. Like if you miss what was on channel 35 and oh, what was that? You have to wait till it hits again and goes back. But anyway, Let's
Not the answer
go through
that.
this.
Yeah, no.
Let's go through this slide.
Yeah, no, I mean, next slide. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about this, right? And we have said it. What does FAST offer? Why are we all here? We talked a little bit about the promises on the ad revenue side, but why we're here is really the problem that you were pointing to, Kirby, right? Is this overabundance of content that I'm faced with on a day-to-day basis. Clicking in and out of apps, figuring out what to watch. Do I watch it on social? Do I watch it, on my actual television with a linear experience? How do I go through these things? And we saw also with, the rise of streaming, the rise of video on demand, the depreciation of ads. Those ad revenues sort of started to go down in these spaces. And now the promise that we have as an industry is I, as a content owner, can take my content that has maybe been sitting on the back burner for a long time or has been, sold my AVOD rights. I have, in some instances, a new right that I can exploit. And then I can put that catalog to work. I can get the ad revenue from this content. And you can do it quite quickly. Like most providers are able to set up channels very, very quickly. We saw that from the amount and the abundance of channels we've had in the last few years. Is that always a good thing? We'll talk about that, in a little bit more depth. For the platforms, like we're saying, engagement is so important. I think that's really the key word here. Let people see content the second they open their phone, the second they open their apps, the second they're in their television. That's what, if we look at the social media world, they do so well, right? The second that you open something, you get something, you have plenty of revenue streams from that advertising, and there's a level of engagement that's really deep when someone's logging in or opening their app.
Adam, what was that stat you said? 20% of people don't know what they want to watch before they go to a streaming service?
Yep, exactly. 20% of people have no idea what they want to watch when they're going into a streaming service, or even when they're turning on their TV.
Yep. So let's say I'm part of that 20% cohort. I go to a streaming service. It's an on-demand menu, and I can't find what to watch. It's because there's frankly too much there. I'm overloaded. I'm going to go do something else. Fold laundry, read a book. It sounds too real, actually, for me this week. To the point with FAST and like an always-on type of experience, you kind of got me if I'm in there. I didn't know what I want to watch, and maybe I still don't. But if I'm in something, maybe that's captivating enough for me that I stay there. And if I do, that's a revenue opportunity if that linear content's ad supported. Whereas if I can't find something to watch, I'm out. Nobody's making money. That book I'm reading is not making money. No streaming service is making money. So it's another way to just kind of immediately capture attention and monetize the user. Not that we should think about monetizing users, but I mean, we want to captivate them and engage them.
Absolutely. And just to kind of like add to that, it's something that is so important to discovery. I, as a viewer, may turn my television on, see the CPG grid, and fall into a channel with a piece of content I've never seen before. I had no intention of watching. And here I am now for the next 8 hours, like watching this thing on television because I'm thinking, oh, this is super great. So that idea of instant engagement also has a critical role when we're thinking about content discovery. And that's why you see such a good success rate for niche programming in FAST, right? There's a lot of programming, and we could talk about sports in a bit as well. Like there's a lot of niche programming that you wouldn't really expect to get carriage in traditional expressions of media or traditional like VOD, OTTs, and so on, that you can do in FAST, and bringing that to new audiences and finding your niche audiences because they turned it on, had no idea who you were, and then fell in love with it. I think that's also the ultimate promise here with the linear experience.
Speaking of niches, just real quick, and you meant like kind of people are fascinated with all these little pockets of specialized content. So I ended up not watching something on demand, but I was watching something in the background for about 2.5 hours last night. You know what it was? Just some dude walking in New York City. There's a whole rabbit hole of just that content that exists. It's amazing how many. There's no shortage of content topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we shouldn't really be surprised at that. Again, here I'm going to point a little bit to the social media world and think about this. If you look at, the amount of channels that exist, the amount of content creators with hyper niche focuses and whatever their format is, that content is there and that audience is there. I mean, some of these people have millions and millions of followers, right?
Yeah.
For something as simple as a 4K walkthrough. I watch it myself,
Yeah.
by the way, like a 4K walkthrough of a city. So this is a lot, it's sort of bridging that in a space that, we would consider more traditional video entertainment.
And let's quote that, like, for your premium movie services that might be listening to this webinar. Like, I chose to watch somebody with a camera strapped to his chest walking around the city rather than the premium content I was trying to find on demand last night. That's a true story. It's a fact.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
absolutely.
Content, it's really democratized. All right,
For sure. Awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think this is the key of the talk, right? Where we really want to look at the challenges we face as an industry. We forefronted it a little bit, like let's learn from our mistakes. Let's identify what those growth opportunities were previously. But listen, with FAST, it's a little bit like a gold rush. Yeah, it is. You were the promise of capitalizing your back catalog. Ads are coming back and swinging. You can monetize that. We're seeing that people are watching it. You have the opportunity to present niche space. But with such rapid expansion, there's always going to be growing pains, right? And this is going to be across all of these three different categories. You have the content owners, which there's a really high level of investment needed. You have to get there fast, because it matters where you live on these EPGs, right? Like it used to. So you do have to maybe for the first time think about, metadata, right? Like, I mean, Kirby, you come from this world of UX design and recommendation engines. So just to quickly pause before we go into the whole thing, what does metadata mean to you, right?
it's interesting, and just kind of like just kind of prepping for this webinar today. Like, I think it's interesting. And I had a company, we didn't do metadata. I mean, 4320 started as a recommendation engine. Like, often, like I found it wild and kind of prepping for this. Like, you know what? I don't think a lot about metadata, because ultimately, I mean, UX, I think more of the experience, but it powers everything. You can't do any of this with data. Like, if I'm searching for a crime drama and nobody's tagged this content, nothing's showing up. Or if I finish oh my gosh, I can't even think of if I finish a sports documentary and no other sports documentaries are properly tagged, it's not going to recommend anything next to me. We're kind of all missing the mark here. Yet we're putting out industry report after industry report how much content discovery is a challenge, but why don't we do something about it with metadata, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really it. Metadata is a foundation. It is, if we think about the industry as like within the allegory of a home, it's your foundation. And what that means to content owners is that, like, we're having to think about metadata for the very first time. The idea is, let me take my content, my back catalog, and put it on there. Problem number one, it's probably archival material, which means that I either have it in a physical archive, which I need to go physically fish out, find a CD or DVD player, and then start screenshotting. I need to source it from data that might not have been provided. There's a really important part of this fast journey, which is coming to terms with the content life cycle. As your business is predicated on selling content rights, if you're a production studio, or making sure that you are sort of funding these productions, that content, which a lot of it is archival and fast, has had a whole life. It's gone to VOD, it's been distributed to others, it's gone everywhere. And so now you, for the first time, with this new sort of thing that you can play with, need to either rebrand, aggregate that data for the first time, and get set up in a good enough shape that you can launch, because you have to launch quickly. Then you consider the fact that, okay, now I need to make this metadata happen. I need to create a lot of this stuff, or I need to find it in the first place, maybe set up a team if I can. Then you run into, well, there's slightly different requirements across the board. Distribution is the name of the game. So I need to make sure that I can plug in, as it were, into these different platforms and outlets. So for a content owner, it represents a pretty high barrier to entry. I mean, you can have up to 10 different tech partners when you're setting up your fast channels, right? And so it's a monetary investment, it is a time investment, it's a resource investment, and it's something that needs to be done very quickly. So that's the content owner side. Then you look at platforms, again, thinking about the industry as a house, thinking about metadata as a foundation. If you're building a house and it's slightly leveled over here, and there's maybe just a slight difference over here. You can start stacking the bricks, you can start putting it together. Maybe you get the first floor done. By the time you get to the second floor, you're probably going to have a really lopsided house. So you're going to have to spend most of your time leveling everything out, making sure that you have a good foundation so that you can continue building upwards. And if we look at the volumes of fast channels that exist, that's really hard to do, right? We're not just talking about like a piece of content anymore on a program level. We're talking about channels, right? With a linear component, with 14 days of data and live datas and schedules that you have to pull in. That can get really, really hard and can really make you spend more time on stabilizing what's coming in than looking towards the future. And then as a viewer, you know, we talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of things we've been seeing in the fast space. I will say that the fast viewer has slightly different habits than your average consumer in that they like the niche content. They kind of are okay with spending more time on that EPG to really find what they want. Also because, you know, that content is flying like right before their eyes. There's a little bit of satisfaction that comes with that, with actually seeing it as you're flipping through the channels. But it's a busy EPG, and a lot of these services don't have logins. So then it's also recommendations. I don't know that that's even really a thing right now within Fast, recommending this channel for you or that channel for you, or this is exactly what you guys would want to watch on a Sunday night or a Friday night or so on. We do have reels and so on, but that's a big part of where Fast is going to have to go.
Yeah, it's the login is a big piece and just unifying, because think about how we consume this content too. It's like we're watching on a laptop, maybe TV, but let's just go TVs. I got a Roku downstairs and a Samsung upstairs. But if you're using the same service, that's great for you in the service. But if it's not uniting that viewing with the user account, you're really missing out, and it's really going to be very hard to surface any meaningful, personalized recommendations. Like correct me if I'm wrong, where the best you can kind of do is do a global user recommendation type of thing. But like if you can marry those devices together with the user registration, like you can do great things. Yeah, like fast services have been slow to adopt that for various reasons. I won't get into, but if you're seeing it, which is great from a product UX background, it's great to see that come together. Yeah, and the data or lack thereof challenges just it gets exacerbated the more channels that get added to this, and it's not so much me saying there's a channel problem. It's a fix. You need the data. And it's a lot. It's like new channels coming all the time, but refresh rate, the content refresh, like, yeah, there's linear content scheduled for out 14 days, but the content's always like, there's new content always coming. And so it's an operation. It ain't easy. It ain't easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that future state and what's possible, right? When you have that metadata, when you have that foundation where you're able to connect all of these pieces, because across the supply chain, you're feeling the pressure from volume, right? So, you know, if we can maybe just quickly jump to the next slide, we can dig into the content owner stories, and then we can start looking at sort of where we're going to be going, how we can be setting ourselves up, and what the questions are around all of this. So if you're thinking about it from the content owner perspective, and we'll get into the devices in just a bit, but when I'm setting up a fast journey, and I need to think about metadata, that's a really hard thing to do, because I'm thinking about scheduling, I'm thinking about all the vendors I need, I'm thinking about, you know, how long is it going to take for me to see revenues? Where can I actually distribute my channels? Where am I going to see the best revenues? How is it going to resonate with these different audiences, different geographies? Typically, it takes around 8 to 9 months realistically to start seeing revenues on fast channels. And then you have to start learning, where am I successful? Which channels are successful? What content is successful on which platform and which territory, et cetera, et cetera. This means, like I said at the top, you have a huge resource constraint. Like there's a high barrier to entry when it comes to fast. And I think what we saw with the explosion of the volume of channels is that because it was this new thing, we were at a stage a few years ago where I was just worried, all right, I got to set my channel up. I got to get to market. I want to see how this plays out. And then maybe I'll build out my strategy. But because there's such a high barrier to entry, because I'm worried about speed to market, maybe I didn't invest as much as I needed to in metadata and in my foundation because I'm so concerned with getting there, which is a completely valid concern. Now that we're really in the adolescence of the fast market, it's time for us to start thinking about these things a little bit more. Also, because if you think from the content rights perspective, with fast, I can capitalize on my back catalog, but maybe I've already sold some of that content onto different AVODs or onto different VOD rights. So there's also a risk of cannibalization, because ultimately what you want is to keep your eyeballs on that fast channel. So now we're at a place where we're saying, okay, we're out there, we've gotten our channels launched, we've put in the basic investment that's needed, or we're currently doing so. I need to start looking at this holistically across my content strategy, understanding my distribution strategy, frankly, understanding what my content rights distribution strategy is as well. And so metadata is something that we'll need to invest in, because you'll see this with fast channels as well. It can be the same piece of IP, but that IP may resonate more strongly with the UK audience than it will with the US audience. So you're having to slightly tweak imagery, descriptions, maybe even the titles of the show and their different presentations in order to get and keep those eyeballs on there. So, I mean, Kirby, I'm interested to see what were you thinking about in terms of like the types of fast channels you're seeing and what your experience has been like watching some of these fast channels?
Well, I was just literally writing a note on number 3 here. EPG placement impacts discovery, and I wrote that down. What I need to think about, because you caught me in real time here, is obviously it's important where you show up on the EPG. Like if I go back to cable days, like you wanted to show up like you didn't want to be channel 899. So channel placement certainly matters for the channel owner, but ultimately for the platform too. And because and I'm going somewhere with this, because if I, the user, am seeing irrelevant content, I'm gonna think the app kind of sucks. Like I did it wasn't fast at all, but essentially I was working with a streaming service, not doing any personalization, had tons of content, did a lot of research and findings, and I mean a lot of good content too. Their problem is their library was too big. So those awesome nuggets they had, they're too spread out. They weren't personalized. And like part of the journey when I started working with them is like I'm nested like 18 screens in here and I'm finding cool stuff. Why is this? It's just the takeaway was this is like too much stuff. The value, my perceived value as a user is, well, there's nothing here for me. When in fact we know that's wrong. But the way it was packaged and presented tells me there's nothing here. So if I think about EPG placement, obviously it matters for me, a content owner, to be well placed. And ultimately what I'm going at here is personalization. It behooves a channel owner if you're somebody that would be watching my content, and it behooves the platform if they've now married my channel with the content you want to watch. Let me just throw some random thing at you. What if I told you the Netflix EPG was I kind of spilt that. What if I told you the Netflix home screen was an EPG?
No.
Like there's 3,000, 4,000 assets on Netflix. The only thing different between that app and a fast service is well, fast service is going to have the EPG. Netflix has little tiles, but both of them, there's content behind them. And Netflix is personalized. EPG is kind of sorted by numbers. Like, what if we just personalize these EPGs? And my head just thinks about a lot of stuff, and maybe we're not there yet. We'll get there, but like that's what my head thinks. I think that why can't Netflix home screen be an EPG? The content's content. Like I don't know as a user what's behind here. Is it linear or is it on demand?
Well, I think we can really I could talk about that for 3 hours. Honestly, I'm not gonna. But when we think about the expressions here from the point of view of the viewer, if you think about Netflix as an EPG, if you think about content library as an EPG, or you think about this huge EPG we have in Fast as well, it's a question of curation fundamentally. And going back to your point earlier, right? We'll segue now into sort of the platforms. I think it's the perfect point to make here is if you don't have a login, if you don't have the logins between devices, you don't know this is device A, device B, if you are just presenting sort of, a literal library to the viewer, what do you have to build connections and how do you curate? It's going to be from the content itself. So that means that each piece of content needs not just, hey, here's a description, here's the airing date, here's maybe a few images. It needs advanced data around it for us to be able to draw new lines. I mean, with the linear coming back, I'm really excited. I'm hoping to see the rise again of the program executive and programming executive, because what was so beautiful about the linear experience 20 years ago was stringing together these pieces of content, the stories, what was the flow, the buffers that were going in between as well. And that also made you connect so intimately with the brands and with the platforms. And it really fostered a sense of engagement. So ultimately having a really strong and advanced level of description and metadata allows for those different connectors to be pulled together. Now, at the top, I sort of introduced Gracenote as connecting audiences to the content they love across sports, music, and video. Those connections between those three industries are also really important. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of genres and the most successful genres and fastest sports and live sports. And now we're seeing the rise of niche sports, localized sports on these EPGs as well. So being able to say, hey, I'm a viewer, I want to have a lean back experience. It's Friday. It's been a really rough week. I'm just going to turn this channel on. I'm going to see, and maybe I click on, my favorite sports or some Dragon Boat tournament that's available. Okay, this has ended now on the fast channel. I want a VOD experience. You need to connect that. You need to be able to recommend really compelling pieces of content that the viewer couldn't do themselves. And that's a really important point, because I always give the example, if I'm a Marvel fan or a Star Wars fan, I know I can maybe watch it in machete order, or I can go ahead and curate my own sort of playlist, if you will. It's when a platform, it's when a service allows you to sort of draw new connections and that you can rely on it for recommendations, that engagement really, really deepens. So yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on most of these points, but yeah, recommendations, personalizations, simplifying navigation, and then also understand how does navigation sort of go? Does that just mean the EPG? Does that mean connecting to my video on demand services? How do we move around this? And to come back to the idea of the viewer, we have higher expectations now. I know what I want to see. I want to see maybe some more personalized images. I will have a really, really high point of view on how something should be presented to me. I mean, if you think about it, 10 years ago, there were no images. It was just pieces of text on a screen. And, maybe you didn't even have a description. You just knew what time and the title was and so on. That doesn't really cut it anymore. You need to tell me as much of this piece of content is, so that way I can go down the content rabbit hole if I want to, right? If I turn on my TV, I see a new show I've never seen before. I like it. I want to know who it is. I want to know who's in it. I want to know other pieces of shows that are like it. And I want the full experience of just being able to say, hey, shuffle, or hey, look at this. Maybe, can I watch this all on VOD and not think, where is it? How do I interact with it, right? You have to sort of remove that barrier. So finding the relevant content, making sure that it's a consistent experience, right? And I'll briefly touch here on ads, which I think we talked about slightly before, right? The ad experience in AVOD and in FAST contributes, in my experience, to it makes it, if you're served the same ad 7 times in a row and you really like the piece of content, you might not be so inclined to continue watching. So making sure that you have also that ad experience, that you have a foundation that you can look at is super important, because I think that's one of the things as an industry we need to, if we want to retain eyeballs, we know people don't like ads, but we know that as an industry, the revenues are super important, extremely important, and absolutely pivotal. We need to strike that balance in how do I present a continuous experience where I'm recommending content that the audience couldn't, curate for themselves, and tie in ad experiences that also allow me to enjoy it,
100%. You can't do that without data.
Yeah, I mean, it is It's the underlying sort of matrix, right? It is your highway, it's the foundation of your house. And one thing I will say, also just to wrap up on the viewer side of things, I, as a viewer, I don't know about fast. We talked about this, right? Like if you actually ask any of your loved ones, hey, what's your favorite fast channel? They'll have no idea what you're talking about, right?
Fast channel.
Exactly. They'll be like, what do you mean? It's like, oh, have you seen X, Y, or Z? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, this I understand a bit more. But they know when it goes wrong. And I think that's what it is with metadata, right? Nobody notices it until it goes wrong. Nobody notices it until it isn't there. So making sure you have good images and making sure that you have the information, maybe you started and you've launched, or you have your service, you have your fast channels, and you think, okay, I've done this investment. I'm finally seeing some revenues. Do I really want to put more revenues into this? How does this look for my business in terms of investment? I would say that having that not just basic level of data, but really enriching it and really making sure that you have this wonderful foundation that you can provide the perfect, well, not perfect, but a very deep, engaging viewer to the experience to the further viewer, starts with metadata. It's really, for fast, I think that the channel success can really depend on content metadata, and fast content really matters. So I think to wrap this up a little bit, because I know we have to leave some time for the Q&A, we put together a grace note here. We put together a few recommendations, and some of that is what we've been saying all along, which is consider where you are in your fast journey, whether you're a platform, whether you're a content provider, whether you're a tech supplier, so on. Think about, where do you live? What have you invested in at this point? Where do you want to go? What does it mean to you in terms of distribution, but in terms of getting ready for the next generation? Fast is going to continue to be around. We're going to see what form that takes in the next 5 years, but there's a lot of evolution that's going to be happening from an EPG point of view, from a connectivity point of view, and making sure that you have your foundation ready is pivotal. And then one point to quickly touch on is we have the audiences for fast. I think now it's about that next step to maturity of making sure we're capitalizing on monetization and ad monetization, and that the industry really reaches that promise that we have with those projections in terms of ad spend and investments. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, just, we've put together a series of recommendations in a guide called Metadata Matters, Powering Future Fast Channel Success. You can go ahead and download that at nielsen.com as well. But yeah, I mean, sort of love to hear what your takeaways are on this before we move just into the Q&A portion.
Yeah, so just hearing you talk, Adam, and I'm not making this up. Like I want to, like you're making me put my product hat on. Like what you're saying is actually terrible for somebody like that loves hobbies and has ADHD, such as myself. Like I want to stop what I'm doing. I actually want to like operate a fast service. There's so many ideas I'm just writing down. So I wanted to give you time to go through the whole thing, but I got a whole list of different cool ideas with EPGs, with program blocks, like I'm glad to do this with you because, like I said, I don't think about metadata a whole lot. Even though I know what it is, I understand the value, but like I understand the end result. But like I really haven't had to in 4 years, 5 years since we first launched this company. As more relevant to this conversation today is like, man, this is the underpinning of the whole thing. And as we're talking, this is going to be not as sexy as any executions you do with any clients, but back when I was at Float Left, which for those who don't know, I ran an app development company as co-founder. If you're around in between the years 2009 2019, we probably built your app at some point. But we did an interesting metadata experience. We were working with a movie streaming service. Their big thing was they have A-list talent, but B-list movies. So it's either stuff like before the actor or actress's prime, maybe after, however that played out. So it's like the names you know, but the movies you never knew they were in. And what we were seeing with analytic data is that there were a lot of users searching for Titanic. Like, well, this server thing gonna have Titanic. Like that's a huge movie, but it's gonna have plenty. Kate Winslow, obviously Leo. And so what we did, we built some data around, because what we're finding, all right, you're looking for Titanic, you're not seeing it. What do users do when they can't find what they want, whether it's a search or recommendations or anything we're talking about? They're leaving. And as a streaming service, you can't have that. So how do you keep people engaged in these products that we're building? And so what we did, we did a whole metadata thing with the search results. And so if you search for something that wasn't there, we would give you stuff that you might be looking for, because we know what you're looking for Titanic. We don't know why you're looking for it. Maybe you just want to see a Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, we have plenty of those movies. Or maybe you love shipwrecks, you sicko. And maybe you just want to see more of that. So we'll show you a second.
No, I mean, it makes sense.
And so it was pretty cool. And engagement saw a lift from that. That was our little metadata thing we did way back.
Absolutely. Just, as a sort of like last thought, I mean, that's why, yes, for fast, but content metadata truly matters, because it's about that program. It's about the life cycle of that program and making sure that it gets found by the right person at the right time, the right day, and the right hour. Right. So, yeah.
100%. Yeah, let's kick off some Q&As. I see one here. I'm going to go with this one first because it stands out. Not only it stands out, but also it's probably my favorite one. Is let's talk about KPIs. So as a new entrant to FAST, as someone that's looking to launch channels, what KPIs should I be focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I can talk about this from a few different angles. And obviously, I think from a metadata perspective, KPIs, you need to be looking at how much, well, number one, how many hours do you have? How many hours of new content can you chop that library up into? Where do you think it's going to resonate most? In terms of KPIs, I mean, this is why getting good metadata matters, because it honestly should come before you're even thinking about launching a fast channel. You need as much data as possible to make curatorial decisions on which distribution outlets and pathways are going to fit for me and my content. So your KPI number one should be, do I have enough metadata today with enough hours to understand and to plan ahead, right? You may not need the absolute most advanced metadata, but you need enough to be informed. And you need, for step one, to make sure you have the right amount of hours and that you can get that metadata out into distribution. Everybody has slightly different requirements. So look at the volumes you have, understand where you may need help, and understand where you may need a little bit more information. So less KPIs, more questions you really should be asking yourself as you start your journey.
Yeah, right on. And if I think about that exercise I did with that streaming service with a lot of content, I would even add that metadata can make a small library pop and also make a large library not feel like it's overwhelming to the point where I don't think there's anything there. When in reality, it's just like there's too much there.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see.
Hey guys.
Here's a.
Thought I'd just jump in and let you know that we're getting close to time here, and got time for just a few more questions. There's one that I want to make sure that we get to because it's right in the wheelhouse, and so that's why I'm taking over here for a second. And that's about VJ's question. Actually, thank you, VJ, for bringing this up about standards for a standard spec for metadata for FAST. And I want to let VJ and the rest of our audience know that there are, in fact, standards. We've been working on them for quite a long time in this industry. Before FAST was something you watched. It was just something that you hoped to be if you were in a race or something. And so there's a metadata standard for display metadata. So that is the title, description, all of the talent, just every single piece of content metadata you can imagine. We're also working on a standard for fast EPG. That is the content that, or the data that gets displayed in an EPG. How is that communicated between partners right now? There is really no standard for the way that's done in our industry. So it's spreadsheets and cocktail napkins and matchbook covers or whatever it might be. It's not very efficient, and it's actually can be prohibitive in some cases for platforms to get your channel up there just because there's so many different ways that that content is getting communicated. So we're working on both of those things. For anybody that wants to get involved in those projects, if you're members of OTT.X, send us an email, info@OTT.X. And if you want to learn more about the standards for metadata, you can find out about those on our website as well. So that was the first thing. Next thing, I wanted to ask Adam, you talked about a lot about metadata and about where it might come from. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why there would be advantages for a content provider to using Gracenote for their metadata as opposed to creating their own feed in-house. It's something I think that many of those in the industry now are kind of pulling things together. They've got their own shop, they've got their own spreadsheets. What is it that we could be looking to a company like Gracenote for?
Well, I think what you're looking at, right, when you're thinking about metadata aggregations and aggregators is we've been doing this for a long time. And this, this is our bread and butter. Where you can lean on us is that we have a very vast library of content, imagery. We've been doing that. We've maybe had some of these standards before they even came into the zeitgeist. So where we can help really is you don't have to do everything from scratch. There are companies out there such as Gracenote who have these vast libraries that house a standardized, data set with advanced description. Because for us, it's not just about aggregating data, it's about enriching that data, bringing it to the next level so that it can power some of the experiences that Kirby and I, have written down on a napkin and are thinking will be coming into the industry soon. So we're here, and I'd love to talk to people more specifically about that, but certainly leaning on our library, leaning on the fact that we've been doing this for quite some time.
And thank you to OTT.X member Brad Samuels for that question. And gold star to you, Adam, for using the word zeitgeist in our webinar today. Yeah, I think as you get into any business or really any project, it's really easy to forget that, or it's easy to assume, I guess, that, you're like the only one that's ever thought of this, and you're probably not, right? And there's companies like Gracenote and 4320 and other service providers that have been working on this for a really long time, and there probably aren't too many questions that they haven't already thought about and developed answers for. And so you can save yourself a ton of time and really some actually pretty serious mistakes by taking advantage of what those that have come before have already figured out. And so that's, you'll find that at companies like Gracenote and with some of the standards that I kind of mentioned earlier. So I've been in plenty of meetings or projects where we spent weeks developing a standard for something, and only to find out, a couple weeks into the project that this has all been done before. And all of that time from all those people sitting around a conference table for hours and hours was really just kind of, actually not well used. So do take advantage of what's been done before so you can add on to it and add even more to this industry. I think we're about out.
Yeah, I think just to jump in there, I think I mentioned it in passing, but as we've been doing it for so long time, we also put together this guide, Metadata Matters, right? And you can download this at nielsen.com. It has a lot of recommendations, and we talk about sort of the journey of metadata, what to be looking out for, and especially for content providers, I think that metadata is something that we're having to reckon with, or you're having to reckon with as you come onto this fast journey. Read as much as you can. There are plenty of great resources like OTT.X, 4320, and Gracenote, and so on. There's not a lack of literature in this space, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think metadata is, maybe it's not sexy. If you pronounce it metadata, it sounds a little sexier. But it really is kind of the table stakes. You know, for all of the things that we're supposed to be able to do with fast and on demand in terms of discovery and personalization and really making a superior product to what has been delivered before, you've got to have the metadata for it. And so you know, I like the point is as you're starting out, if you are starting out, you know, before this becomes a giant problem, start collecting the metadata and make sure that you're getting the right pieces. I worked at an organization back in 2006 and 2007, Microsoft. We launched the Xbox Live Video Marketplace. We, you know, we're just like everybody else, just trying to get it out there and didn't think nearly as much about metadata and organizing it as we should have. And it became a huge project to fix later. So don't do that. Start now and get your taxonomy figured out. Start collecting the data when you have one piece of content, and you'll save yourself a ton of headaches. So just assume you're going to be just as big as Xbox. So you want to start with the right foundation, as Adam was saying.
Hey, Eric, I want to just announce that at the OTT.X Summit coming up, that I'm going to be having a Metadata shirt, like a Metallica logo, but Metadata. I mean, immediately where my mind went with that.
Hey, we'll have a merch table. You can help us out. Go get some merch at the merch table. The Metadata tour is launching in September. You know what, guys? It's about 11 o'clock, so we're going to close things up here. Thanks a lot for
all right. Thanks.
So, Adam,
thanks for having us. Yeah, great.
It's great to dig down, and thank you for peeling off some of the shiny exterior of fast content distribution into some of the messy realities that businesses got to face in order to succeed. And thank you to all of you, our dear audience, for attending, for your continued support of OTT.X. As always, the session was recorded and it's going to be available on our website at OTT.X.org. There is an impressive collection of presentations from our online and in-person events over the last few years, including the OTT.X X-Friends, which was just a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles. A reminder that the next episode of The Buzz is going to be presented at this same time next Wednesday, June 12th. That is 10 a.m. Pacific. The Buzz features prominent panels of industry leaders, experts, and gurus who discuss current industry topics, give us their unfiltered analysis, diagnosis, and opinions about what's going on right now in the industry. Next week's episode is being moderate by Colin Dixon from Enscreen Media. We've got panelists Beth Anderson of BBC Studios, Jonathan Barbato of Best Ever Channel, Stuart McLean from Fast Studios, and Jason Peterson from Go Digital Media. You can register for this session on the OTT.X website at OTT.X.org. Find out about everything that's going on in the OTT.X sphere, including how to join our community and support the industry by becoming a member. If you'd like to contact us, please do. Reach out to info@OTT.X.org. We love hearing from you. Well, that concludes our session today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks once again to Adam from Gracenote, Kirby from 4320. We'll see you all in a week or so. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, y'all.